Hi, everyone, and welcome to Doula Givers World Training Day. My name is Suzanne O'Brien. Thank you so much for being here. It is April 20th, 2021. And again, I want to thank you for joining me in this training today. I hope that you get as much out of it as so many people have. And this is something, again, that is a life skill, and you'll be surprised at how much inspiration, hopefully, you get from today's training, as well as empowering skills. So again, this is Doula Givers World Training Day. Welcome. So we have, this is our third annual World Training Day, and again, we are in the year 2021. It has been such an intense year and a half for everyone. So I want to bring us together in maybe just taking a moment of taking a few deep breaths, getting grounded and coming together again as this global family. What is wonderful about what some of the things that we were blessed to have learned this year is, again, how we can connect with people all over the world and how much more similar we are than different, which is a really important part to remember. So if I may, I just want to share a little bit about my background, if I can. My name is Suzanne O'Brien, and I am a registered nurse by trade. I am a former hospice, which is end-of-life nurse, and also a former oncology, which is cancer nurse. And I am a founding member of the National Hospice and Palliative Care's End-of-Life Doula Council, that's NHPCO, which is the membership organization for all of the hospices in the United States. And I'm also a founding member and former vice president of NEDA, which is the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, which is a a nonprofit membership organization for all of the doulas, doula trainers, and organizations for the end-of-life doula movement. And I am the founder and creator of the International Doula Givers Institute. And I will tell you a bit about my story of working in that space as that mainstream medical nurse in cancer and end of life, and having, unfortunately, end of lives be 1,000 times more difficult for families and patients because of the lack of information, support, education about how to care for somebody at end of life. So one of the first things that I want to ask you is death a medical experience? So I'm just putting that out there. Is death a medical experience? And it's actually not. It's a human one. And I think that, again, in the last 100 years, we forgot that. So that is contributing, again, to the removal of end of life, one of the elements, and also the lack of basic education and skills for families on how to care for their loved one at the end of life, which, again, 9 out of 10 people want to be at home. And so it really falls on the family to do that care, and they don't know the first thing about how to do that. And that is really why we have World Training Day and birthed this offering and movement, because it has worked for so many people around the world. And we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to have a positive end of life. It is a human right. It is not a privilege to have this information and support. So we want to make platforms to be able to do that. So this World Training Day is one of them. When we work together, miracles can happen. And we see this all the time in our work. And one of the things that is the most important to remember is, how do we show up for one another? How do we show up in this journey of life? And how do we show up at the highest form of service? So wherever you're called to do that, and again, I have been so honored and privileged to work in this space and to work with people around the world, and the magic that happens when we just show up and bear witness with no judgment, with unconditional love, to be of the highest service, is where the connection and the magic happens, and to me is the whole goal of this beautiful journey called life. So I wanted to share with you one of the outreaches of World Training Day that we did. That was in 2019. I was able to go and donate and do free doula givers trainings all around the country, the beautiful country of Thailand. And we did about 14 different trainings in the month of March. One of the greatest experiences of my life. And again, it's such an honor and privilege to be invited and to work with such incredible people from all over. And this particular training, as you can see, had a mixture of everyone. You know, there were community members, there were medical practitioners, nurses, hospital administration, and on the right there you see that we have Buddhist monks, and these particular Buddhist monks worked in end of life in Thailand. And what was so beautiful about the training, and this is what I find all the time, is that it doesn't matter who you are or what you do or what titles you have or what role you play. When we get to that really foundational, heart-centered humanity core, it is the most magical thing. And you know, these incredible people that are doing this work at a very high level over in Thailand, you know, had so many incredible, beautiful things to say about the training, the Doula Givers training, and how, you know, we are one heart, and there's so much compassion in this training, and it was really beautiful what they learned, and really an honor to hear that. So such a privilege to be able to, again, work with people all over the world. So congratulations on the movement. I am so thrilled that you are here today, because you are going to be learning incredible information that hopefully will change your life. I get emails all of the time from people who took this training and years later even used it, and how much it changed that experience for them and their family. I also get a lot of emails and people messaging on Facebook and social media saying that taking this training brought them closure to an end-of-life experience they had years prior, so that they now were able to put things in place where they didn't know what things meant or what happened. They were able to actually find peace and closure, and that is an incredible thing. So there is a movement going on. It's what I call a rebirth of death. And you know, end of life is a natural part of our life's journey. It used to be revered as a sacred part of the journey. We're bringing that back, and let me just share with you that it can be and is the most, and one of the most sacred parts of this life's journey. Although we really don't do anything for it. We do for the birthing of babies, but we don't for this side of things, for the end of life. Well, it's time to bring that back, and I'm glad to say that that is happening. So death is having a rebirth in the most beautiful way. And why do I say that? Because yes, it is so hard to say goodbye to somebody that we have loved for so long, but it is 100% guaranteed that we're going to have that end of life, not just with those we love, but with ourselves as well. And what I have found is that what you can learn with allowing death to be a part of your reality, knowing that one day the journey will not be the same as it is today, makes you live with an entirely different perspective on your day. And also, perspective is absolutely everything. So living with gratitude, getting to what you really want to do, and living with what the foundational laws of non-judgment, of compassion, kindness, and gratitude, so incredibly important, and really can change everything for you. So there is a beautiful movement going on, and every single person on this planet is a part of that. We are so much more similar than different, and that is an incredible awareness. Are there national initiatives that support this new profession and movement? So end-of-life doula, if you've heard death doula, there is a whole new profession going on with, just like birthing doulas, now they have doulas that are supporting patients and families at the end of life. And why is that necessary? That is necessary because we have an elder population, number one, that we have never seen before in history, and it continues to grow demographically. We have the largest elder and aging population we have ever seen, and we do not have the setup to care for them in mainstream medical. And I will just share with you from a very loving space that it's not a medical experience, end of life. It is a human one. And to bring in a holistic, non-medical professional that can help support and be that fill of the gap that's in mainstream medical, that does not have all those time restrictions having to see all those patients and all that reimbursement documentation is an absolute beautiful support system for not only the patient and family, but for the medical practitioners as well. So there are national initiatives now in place that support that movement. The NHPCO, which is again the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, they have an end-of-life doula council that shares about the end-of-life doula role and how it supports the mainstream medical. Also, we have NEDA, the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, which is the nonprofit membership organization for doulas that are doing this profession, for training organizations and for other organizations. So it's an incredible, beautiful movement that again, I'm so proud to be a part of. Now, why is this so important? The training, the movement, the awareness. 9 out of 10 people say that they want to be cared for at home if they become terminally ill, 9 out of 10. And this was a National Hospice Organization poll done in 1996. Every single statistic poll that I can find is the same exact thing. In fact, sometimes it says 9.4 people, which I don't even know how they get the 4.4, but that's okay. So this is what I was finding as well in my work, that people want to be home at the end of life. Yet I also found that families don't usually know the first thing about how to care for their loved ones. So this offering, Doula Givers World Training Day, the level 1 training, is to give that skill back to families and my patients. So mostly in the oncology unit, my patients would share with me that they wanted to be home. And many times they would say to me, why am I here? Why am I in the hospital? I just want to go home. And this is when they were very advanced in their disease process. And I thought to myself, this is as a young nurse back maybe 18, 20 years ago. And I thought, if they could tell me, if they were of clear, sound mind and could tell me that they wanted to go home, why weren't they? What was happening here? And so uncovered what I call the elements, the perfect storm to how we are in such a backwards, dysfunctional place with end of life now. But there's positive news because we are bringing it back. We are talking about it. We are empowering families with skills, and we are learning the gifts that, knowing again that one day this journey will not be the same as we know it today, what we can learn from that on how to live fully. One of the other very important factors is that when you do not choose what you would want or not want for your end of life wishes, it gets chosen for you. And usually that's something that people do not want. I see that unfortunately all the time. So that is called an advance directive, and an advance directive consists of these 2 documents, a healthcare proxy and a living will. And a healthcare proxy is who you would speak to speak your wishes you've already chosen for you in the event that you can't speak for yourself. And the living will is what those choices are, what you choose for treatment or what you would not want in certain instances. So 87% of people say it's important to do their advance directive, 87%, yet 23% of people have actually done them, and of the 23%, only half of the people know where those documents are. So this is a very important piece to having a positive end of life. There are 2 factors in my experience. I've been honored and blessed and privileged to work with over 1,000 people at the end of life and their families in all different parts of the world and different cultures. And the majority of things that I've seen, there are 2 things that you can do that will make end of life 80 to 90% better, no matter what your disease process is, no matter what your circumstances are. One of them is doing your advance directive. The second is what you're doing today, learning the skills, the basic skills on how to care for somebody at end of life. Those 2 things lead to end of life being 80 to 90% better, no matter what disease process, and that is really important to note. So again, most people say that yes, this is important to do, yet 23% have done them, and of the 23%, only half know where they are. They are no good unless we know where they are and have that family conversation. So very important statistic. Now this is what I again call the perfect storm, or the elements that are contributing to the very dysfunctional relationship we have with end of life right now. Death is the #1 fear in the United States and many other countries. The #1 fear, and fear can be paralyzing. So when The concept, when I was a hospice nurse, the concept of the hospice nurse is to teach the loved ones and family how to actually do the care for their person who is at end of life in the home. And you can only imagine that the very late process that people come on hospice services, end of life services, because everyone is kind of ignoring it, not wanting to go there, not wanting to admit that end of life because of this fear, because of this removal of it from being a natural part of the life cycle, that this fear is palpable and it really prevents people from even learning the basics. So it was very, very difficult for me as a hospice nurse, again, with the time limitations. A lot of times with my hospice, I was there once a week for 1 hour visiting patients and families if my patient was what you called stable. And there's just not a lot of time to do any teaching within that. Very heartbreaking. And so having somebody in the home that's able to be the eyes and ears for hospice, being able to alert the hospice team with changes, empowering families before they ever need it, before they're faced with having to care for their loved one and having this fear be a block of learning. Let's talk about it and teach now. So again, death is the #1 fear in the United States and many other countries as well. The #1 fear of the dying patient is that they do not want to be a burden to their family. So many times I would come in to care for a patient and my patients would literally say to me, my hospice patients would literally say to me, look what I'm doing to my family, look at them, how stressed out they were. And they weren't wrong, they weren't wrong. So to empower people with the skills, you know, I often think about how very cruel it is to actually put somebody who's end of life in a home, expecting family to care for them that don't know the first thing about it and are petrified. This is their loved one. So and this is the last opportunity they have. So we don't want them to miss it. So again, we don't want people to feel burdened, but we want to empower families with the skills of how to care for, even if they're not doing the own care, just to know what end of life is, just to understand the phases of end of life can absolutely change everything for their experience. Now, the demographic shift. It is like nothing that we've ever seen before in history, and it's only going to get larger and larger for decades to come. 78 million baby boomers started turning 65 about 5 years ago. So now this continues to grow and grow, and 20% of the 78 million in the United States do not have their own children. So I often thought, who's going to take care of them? But when I talk to people around the world, their aging populations are booming as well. So it's because we've made, you know, medical advances, and the aging population has never been like this in history, and we do not have setups for them. So not only, usually it's the adult child that will care for an elder parent, not always though, just there could be logistic reasons, geographical reasons, and sometimes there's families that are, you know, not in a term where they're connected, where somebody is going to care for somebody. So there's many different reasons why. There's no judgment here, but there's also that 20% that don't even have that option. So we have to put things in place, and doulas are a great way to do that. Doula Givers is the end of life doula training, and it is the skill of how to learn how to care for somebody who is dying. There are different levels of end of life doula trainings. Today, you are learning the family caregiver training. This will again teach you the 3 phases of end of life, teach you how to care for your loved one, identify the interventions in each phase, everything through from the time of diagnosis all the way through end of life, holistic, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And then, of course, there's the end of life doula profession. And that is, again, for people who are called to this space to be end of life doulas, to work with patients and families to help them in this sacred time of their lives. 100 years ago, this was a skill that was handed down generation to generation. So a lot of people say, oh, this is new. This is not new. This is very old. And it's so interesting because it's only about 120 years now that we've really removed death from the awareness of our life. And unfortunately, in my opinion, that is created directly linked to the chaos, or part of it, a major part of the chaos that we're seeing in our world. Why? First of all, just the beautiful compassion and natural way that we have our lifespan and we love our family members and generation natural. But what about the wisdom from those at the end of life? What about the incredible value that older people have because they've lived it? And unfortunately, today in our world, we usually treat our elderly like they have no value. We remove them from society. We kind of put them in these homes or different places, and we don't have access to that. And it's time to bring that back for many reasons. First of all, it's incredible, the wisdom and the truth that they can share with you. It's also the right thing to do. But supporting families on how to do that and do that well is a huge component to this. So 100 years ago, this was a skill, again, on how to care for somebody at end of life that was handed down from a grandmother to a grandchild. And we are just bringing it back and adding everything that I've learned in my years as a hospice and oncology nurse to put in a very comprehensive, digestible, holistic training. Here it is, the 3 phases of care. This is the end-of-life doula givers model. You have the shock phase, the stabilization phase, and the transition phase. The shock phase, that is the very first phase. This is when someone gets a terminal diagnosis, and oftentimes there's an overwhelming feeling of shock for both patient and their loved ones. This shock can present itself in many ways, such as depression, denial, anger, and withdrawal. So what can you do? It is very helpful to remember that this person and family have just lost all control over their life. Telling someone that they are terminally ill and that there is no reversing the process requires those around the family to have a strong, supportive presence. Why is this important? It is vital to establish trust and security with the patient and the family at this time when their world has been turned upside down. The best way to achieve this is through being a strong, solid support. Never take over. Meet the patient and the family where they are in the process and work from there. Building the trust will set the tone for your entire journey with them. So many things that I want to really just highlight and point out here is that, are you supposed to come in and fix end of life, whether you are a professional doula or even someone showing up to support your family member at the end of life? Can you fix it? End of life is a natural part of the life's journey. Can you show up and be an incredible support? Can you be a comfort? Can you be a presence? Can you hold that space? Absolutely. And that is something that we really want to remember, not to think that you're coming in to take over. You also have to remember the control factor. So somebody who's been given a limited time left, oftentimes they feel that they have no control anymore over their lives, and we want to give them back control. So one of the techniques we use in doula givers is that I allow the patient to make decisions about absolutely everything. The only thing we will not compromise on is safety, because we can avoid safety issues as that person declines, and that's of course what we want to do with great symptom management. But we want the patient to know that this is their journey and we are here to support them in that. So we want to show up, we want to hold that space, we want to ask what we can do for them. So I usually ask the main patient and the main caregiver, what can I do for you? I also let them know that I'm going to be here with them the entire journey, and that I will be of that support continuously, not just for the person that's having the experience of end of life, but for their family members as well. So building this trust is critical. So give them back control. Ask, what can I do for you? Meet the patient and family where they are. So this does not mean physically, although of course you're going to meet them physically where they are. It means meeting them emotionally where they are. Remember, in the shock phase, people can present with withdrawal, depression, anger, all of these different emotions. Show up and meet them where they are in their journey and just be that supportive presence. So I've had patients where I have met them for the first time and they've, been bedridden for weeks. And, you know, they'll say to me, oh, you know, I go golfing every Wednesday. This Wednesday I'm going golfing with my buddies. And I know that they're not going to go golfing, but for some reason they need to say that, maybe for protection for themselves. You know, it doesn't matter why they're saying. Meet them with no judgment and unconditional love where they are, wherever they are, and just work from that point forward. That will help to build that trust. And let me share with you a patient's story about building the trust. So how important this critical time period is, because that trust is either going to get established or not within the first 24 hours. So I remember having a beautiful family that I was able to work with. And the very first time that I knocked on the door of the patient's home. So this woman had come from a different state. She had been given a terminal diagnosis and come from a different state to live with her adult son and his family for her end of life. And I remember knocking on the door and the adult son meeting me at the door with a syringe of medication in his hand and basically shaking. And so I thought immediately, oh, what's going on here? Oh boy. And I remember coming in and I met the patient and she was doing quite well. She was very stable. Her pain was minimal. She was alert and oriented. She was doing well. My immediate work was with him. And as it turned out, he was absolutely petrified that he was going to be caring for his mother at the end of life and didn't know the first thing about what he was doing. What an awful thing to do, right? To somebody, what an awful place for somebody to be 24/7 in this petrified state. So I knew that I had to start bringing his stress level down. And how was I going to do that? I was going to do that by meeting him where he was, listening to him, listening to what his fears were, and also educating and empowering him, letting him know about medications, letting him know about if he needed support and he called, he could reach the hospice team or myself within minutes. We would call him back. And as soon as, and he would fact check me, I would say something, I would teach him something, he'd go fact check me. And as soon as he realized that he could trust me, that I knew what I was doing, and also he would just ring my phone and test how fast I called him back. As soon as he realized that he could trust that, his stress levels started to go down. And I have to tell you, this whole entire journey from start to finish, which we had a few months together, which is not always typical and very much not typical, was incredibly beautiful. And it's because of this initial state of building that trust that he was able to trust in the different parts of our journey, the different phases that his mother was going through, trusting what I was saying to him, trusting that I was there for him, how I was sharing with him, reinforcing teaching of how to care for his mother, that the entire from start to finish was incredibly beautiful. So again, when you show up to work in this space with people, you're not only taking care of the person, you're taking care of their loved ones as well. And if this is your family member, please be aware that every single person attached to that end of life is having their own experience, and they all can be very different. So remember to have that love and compassion in your heart, because I know sometimes family dynamics can get pretty intense, but everyone is having a very probably real and raw connection to this end of life. And so it's very important for us to just hold that space of love in our heart during this time. So again, building the trust, critically important. There are 3 questions that I want you to ask every time you go to visit your family member or every time that you're in with somebody at end of life, because we will use these in every case and on every visit. They are so incredibly effective, and if you do this and only this, you'll be an incredible asset to somebody at end of life. So the first question is, are there any acute issues? So what are acute issues? Acute issues are things that you want to handle right away. An example would be pain, nausea, exhaustion. And why is this important? Because first of all, we know that we have an end-of-life diagnosis and prognosis. So that person's going to be declining. We just don't know at what pace they're going to be declining. So pain changes, nausea changes. These things can change every single day. So maybe somebody's pain was being well managed, but you go in one day and somebody seems really uncomfortable, and maybe their tumor grew inside their body, and maybe it's pressing on nerves, and the doctor or the nurse would not know this and know to change the medication regimen unless they were told. So we want to make sure that we're always assessing for these things, because the goal of this all is to have the highest quality every single day. And when you have close symptom management, you can do that. So I've had people on hospice services, which hospice is incredibly wonderful, the model of care, the people who work for them, absolutely incredible. We've had people on hospice services who have done better in the last 6 months of life than they have in 30 years. Why? Because of close symptom management. It is that effective. It can be that effective. And for me, once you get those acute issues handled and a high quality of life, that's where people can start really, again, enjoying having great conversations, having visits, doing legacy projects, all of the wonderful, magical things that need to be done and that can be done at the end of life. They're not going to do that if they have high pain levels, or if you're extremely nauseous, or if you're exhausted. So these are just some of the examples of acute issues. Second question is, are there any safety concerns? And again, remember that the only thing that we will not negotiate on is safety. Why? Because safety is something that can be prevented, safety issues, with good care, symptom management, and awareness. So what are some examples of safety concerns? Fall risk, somebody falling, confusion, weakness, swallowing. And I'll tell you right now that there are two things that will always happen in an end-of-life journey. We just don't know what day they will show up, when they will show up, but always two things. Number one, that one day that person will not be able to stand and or walk, and one day that person will not be able to swallow. And both of those are extremely important for safety reasons. Somebody falls, breaks a hip. How awful is that? Somebody, swallowing, is being force-fed food. They can't swallow. This is a very natural place at the end of life for us to turn off our swallowing reflex. And when I'm going to reflex, when I'm going to share in that part, I'll go into why. But we, as human beings, know how the body knows how to shut down. And one of the things that happens at the end is that the body does not want to have any food and turns off the swallowing reflex. And so if somebody is force feeding food, somebody can choke, and or the food can go down into their lungs with this aspiration pneumonia. These are two very, very critical things. So we can avoid these when we know what to look for. So the only thing we don't negotiate is on safety, and there's good reason for that. And again, with good type symptom management, you can avoid these issues from happening. Third question is, what is the support system that they have? Why am I asking that on every visit in every case? Why do I continuously ask that? Because that changes. So maybe the adult son was home from California, was able to get 3 weeks off of work. The doctor thought that, his mom would have her end of life within that time period. There is I will tell you right now, there is a much higher power that is going on. So yes, doctors can give a estimation at times, but there is a much higher power that's going on. I have seen people that have lived longer than scientifically possible. I have been there at the bedside. So people say it's not possible they live that long without water. I was like, well, I was there and I saw it. And I've seen people that I have thought would be with us longer and have had their end of life. So if there's a much higher power here, the point is that the support system is so incredibly important. This is not for one person to do. I have unfortunately come into so many end-of-life homes where it's one elderly person taking care of their elderly spouse that's at end of life. It does not and cannot work that way. This should be multiple people caring. And again, why am I saying to ask what support system is there? Maybe that adult son was home for 3 weeks, helping his father with his mother's end of life, and then she didn't have it in that time frame. He has to go back, and now that elder gentleman is by himself. So you want to know ahead of time to put things in place so that we consistently have support. I like to pull from everything. I like to rotate the care, especially overnight, so that we can make sure that the main caregiver is getting rest. Phase 2, the stabilization phase. what it is. So this is the phase where wonderful work can be done, and it is hopefully a time when the patient's pain is under control and all acute issues identified in the shock phase have been addressed, leading to the highest quality of daily living for both the patient and family. When things are stable, conversations can be had, goodbyes can be said, and unresolved issues can be addressed. Again, this is where that wonderful work can be done. Now, why is this important? So very important, because I have to say that when people have had a stabilization phase, and not everyone gets one, and I'll explain that in a minute, when people have had a stabilization phase and used it, it has led to the most incredible, beautiful end of lives that I've ever seen. So let me share for a minute why somebody may not get a stabilization phase. Number one, they may not get a stabilization phase if they have a very quick diagnosis and very quick prognosis. For an example of that would be somebody who is diagnosed, has some pain, goes to the doctor, diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and given a 2 to 3 month prognosis to live. A lot of times families and patients will stay in the shock phase the entire time, not to get to that stabilization phase. The other reason is that many times people are coming on to hospice and doula services right now in transition phase, or going quickly into transition phase, because people wait very, very long until they call it that support. Get that support in. The earlier support comes, both hospice and doulas, the better that end of life is. So what can you do? Stabilization phase. This is the perfect time to sit with a patient and talk. Ask questions about his or her life. This often leads to issues or situations that need to be looked at more closely and resolved. Forgiveness is the path to unconditional love. It is during this phase that we encourage giving and receiving forgiveness of things that have happened during our lives. Patients oftentimes do a life review on their own and go over beautiful insights about the contribution they had in this world. Validate their feelings, be a great listener, encourage family members to have alone time to share with the patient. There are conversations that need to be had that will not take place in a room full of people. These goodbyes are vital to peace and acceptance, allowing for a positive passing. So this is where the magic happens. This is where the work can be done, and this is where I've seen the transformation in energy, in the journey, closure, love, forgiveness being released, anger being released. It's a gift to that person, and it's a gift to the people they are doing it with, their family members and loved ones. Now, why is this important? Unresolved issues will prevent a person from having the most peaceful death possible, and it is vital to use this window of opportunity while the patient is able to communicate, to have lucid conversations, to wrap up loose ends. Patients can do much of this work simply by talking about past regrets with a doula or a trusted loved one. And again, forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness is absolutely everything in this space. Let's venture. And again, remember that every single one of us has forgiveness to give and forgiveness to receive. So let's go back and remember that the 3 questions being used in every case on every visit will be everything you need. If you only do this, you'll be an incredible asset and support to someone at end of life. So what are those 3 questions? Are there any safety concerns? And remember, the safety is the only thing we won't negotiate on. Are there any acute issues? What are acute issues? Those things that need to be handled right away. Example, pain, exhaustion, even somebody in the family having an emotional breakdown, or the patient having an emotional crisis time. That's an acute issue. We want to have all of those dealt with. And then number 3, what is the support system that's available? And, you know, looking ahead of that. So what do we have next week? And if somebody is in now supporting, if they have to go back to their home, to their regular daily life, who is then the next person to step up? 2 extra questions in the stabilization phase is, how can I help this person find meaning to their life? Everyone has a purpose here. Everyone has been of value. Everyone wants to be validated. And this will happen in the stabilization phase, doing that beautiful life review. You know, sometimes we don't even think about the contribution that we had, big and small, and everything has had value. And people will remember how you made them feel. And it might be the kindness that you showed, you know, somebody in your community. It might be, you know, coaching a baseball team, working with children. You know, it's all these things and any of these things. So we want to go down that life review road with that person and highlight the value that they have contributed in this life, because it's all there and they have. Even when people have played the role of being somebody who was, again, on their journey, there's no judgment, we're all on our path, but maybe they were living in a very struggling way and showing people maybe a great example of what other people did not want to be. We never really look at it like that, right? When we see a family member or somebody in our lives who, you know, was acting unconsciously, was acting at a very, in a very negative way, was hurting people. And again, there's no judgment. Everyone is accountable for their own actions and everyone's on their own journey. But when we see examples like that, many times it says to us, I don't want to be like that. I look at that. I want to make sure that I do not do things like that. And that's of value. So everyone's role plays an incredible, strong part, even when it doesn't look like it. Those are the gifts of the higher consciousness that we have to look at. So one thing is, again, helping people to validate the meaning to their life. And number two, how can I help this person find closure and forgiveness? And again, there's two types of forgiveness: forgiveness of others and forgiveness of self. And which one do you think here is the more difficult to do? You got it, forgiveness of self. So one of the things I find so interesting is that we are so easy to be compassionate and kind and forgiving to other people, yet you don't let yourself have the same blessings. So we have got to start with yourself. And one of the beautiful things that people at the end of life will share with me is that there's no judgment, that everything was meant for a learning opportunity, and that they can find that space to forgive themselves, which is one of the most powerful things you could possibly do. We all have to be accountable for our actions, but we also are not being judged, and we have to learn from what we do. And every single person has forgiveness to give, and every single person has forgiveness to receive. Very, very important. Phase number 3, the transition phase. So what it is, the transition is the period of time right before a person dies. It is the transition from this world to the other, whatever your belief system is. And this period of time can last anywhere from hours to days. So typically what I see is that people start going into a transition phase from hours to days. When I start seeing those elements that we'll go over, they go into a deep sleep coma. From hours to days in the deep sleep coma, that body has its end of life. So again, the transition phase is the time right before a person dies. It's the period that can last anywhere from hours to days. So what can you do? As a doula, you should be aware of the way that the body physically shuts down. Systematically, we all die the same way, no matter what disease process somebody has. The body goes through many of the same steps in the very end. Now, not everyone goes through every step every time, but it is best to be familiar with all of the steps or stages so you can identify what is happening and suggest interventions for comfort, or simply let the family know that something they are seeing is a natural part of the dying process and not to be afraid. Why is this important? The transition phase may be the most stressful period of care due to the quick changes the body goes through as it starts to shut down. It is during this phase that the patient will go into a deep sleep as the body eventually dies. There are several changes to be aware of so that you can offer suggestions for comfort or simply reassure the family that what is happening is a natural part of the dying process. This knowledge alone can be very comforting. So let's talk about indications that someone's entering into a transition phase. As a doula, I usually look for 2 of these indications before I let a family know, before I call it with a family that we may be headed into our transition phase. Why is it important for families to know that their loved one's going into the transition phase? Because this is it, right? This is the moment, this is the time. And when someone's going into transition phase, they're going to be going into a deep sleep coma relatively soon, anywhere from hours to days. And if there's anything left that needs to be said, if there's anyone that needs to come, this is the moment. It also really helps to prepare and ground my families for this end of life that's going to be taking place. And that is a huge, important piece. So let's talk about those indications. Number 1, they lose the desire to eat and or the ability to swallow. So we talked about this in the safety, that one of the things that's guaranteed at the end of life is that somebody will not be able to swallow. And what do you think happens? What do you think the first thing that family and loved ones think about when their mother, who is having a terminal diagnosis, is declining food? They start to panic, right? They start to almost guilt her into eating, or even force feeding her, or there's just a panic that sets in, because the reality of it is that we know that somebody has an end-of-life diagnosis and they're starting to decline food. We know we're going to be looking at their end of life showing up very soon. However, to understand what is happening here, so the body is such a smart, amazing vehicle. And when our bodies are starting for their shutdown, remember that death is a natural experience. The body knows what to do. It knows what to do. And so when it says, I don't need any nutrients anymore for energy, I don't need it, I'm going to shut off my swallow reflex because my body's not absorbing them, I don't need them. And what many of my families will say at this moment, if we hadn't had the time to talk about it ahead of time, is that I'm starving her, I'm starving my mother. And what an awful thing to think that you're doing. Absolutely. That is not what's happening here. So for you and I, we have work to do. We need our nutrition. We need those calories for fuel. We get hunger pains because our body says, hey, that's your acid shooting out into your stomach because it's time for a re-up on the nutrients. It's reminding you, and that's where you get those hunger pains, because the body says, we need that, bring it in, we want to absorb it and use it for fuel. People who are at the end of life do not have this. The body does not need it. It's saying, in fact, the opposite. I'm shutting off the reflex because I don't need food. We're not absorbing it properly, and we're getting ready to shut down. So for us to educate family members to know that the person is not starving, they are not suffering. In fact, almost the opposite. Have you heard of religious fastings? Have you heard of fastings where people talk about going into a euphoric state of pleasure when they are not eating? This is what happens. Now, there are things that are important here. There are things that we can do to optimize comfort, meaning people get very parched, they get very dry, their mouth gets that bad taste, very parched tasting. So at this point, you want to make sure that you have mouth swabs, so you have those glycerin, mint, and or lemon mouth swabs that you are refreshing that person's mouth, and using mouth lubricant, which can help to keep moisture in the mouth, so that during this time of transition, not eating and drinking, that person still has that very comfortable moisture in their mouth with that fresh taste. So to understand what the body's doing here, and in fact, it is not suffering at all. It is quite the opposite, going into an electrolyte imbalance and euphoric state. But to force feed somebody in this position is, first of all, very dangerous and also very unfair to do. So we want to explain to families what's happening. So this is usually one of the telltale signs, the very first one. And I usually look for 2 meals consecutively before I start to call it, because everyone can skip a meal once in a while, right? But if it's 2 meals within about a 6 to 8 hour period, I start to say, and then I start to look for at least one of these other indicators. Number 2, they become agitated and or restless, or talking about having to go home or go on a trip. And this is so fascinating. People talk about, I have to go, I have to go. So my belief system is that we're holistic beings, and there's 4 bodies of energy to each of us. So as we're physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual all the time, right now, as you and I are sitting here doing World Training Day, we are 4 bodies of energy. And at the end of life, as the physical body is declining energetically, the spiritual body is growing. And there's one time in the journey, one section in that space, that I believe people have 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in the next. And why do I think that? I think that because I've been with so many people at the bedside, and they have woken up from a sleep state and had all this incredible new information, and this agitation or this knowing. So this is when people have been sleeping most of the time, and they wake up and they're agitated because they know they have to go somewhere. I have to go. So they know they're leaving, but they may not have been out of bed for weeks and or months. So of course that's a safety issue. So what I would say to you is to know that when someone talks about going home, and I've had many families say, but Mom, you are home, they're not talking about that home, which I think is really empowering for us to hear, that what is this home they speak of in all different cultures and religions and places in the world? It's this spiritual home. It's this one consciousness home, which is really beautiful and really important to note. But again, from a practical standpoint, when somebody's saying that, understand that they're going to be leaving us soon and having their end of life. One of the things that has been extremely helpful for families at this space when they're agitated is saying, Mom, what can I do for you? They know they're going somewhere. Do you want me to help you pack? And so a lot of times families have packed just an overnight bag and literally put it next to the bed, and the person has relaxed. So we want to know that there are things we can do. There's also medications that hospice can recommend. I am a medication last person. I believe that we can try other things first, because medications do have a lot of side effects, and it's not always an easy fix. So let's try to use tools that we have used that we know work, and then of course hospice will have recommendations as well. They start to sleep most of the time. So again, they're in this sleep state most of the time, and when they wake up, sometimes, again, my patients have had incredible new information, and also you can experience this, I have to go, this agitation. Number 4, they talk about being visited by loved ones who have died before them or angelic figures. This is one of the most powerful things to experience, a patient sharing that their mother is here, or their mother was here last night. And if up to this time that they had had any fear of their end of life, it is gone now. It is one of the most incredible things to see. It is an incredible thing for families to see their loved one in this. It's almost impossible to describe the peace, the serenity. And I want to tell you that this happens so often, about people coming back to help cross loved ones over at the end of life. One of the things that I used to think as a young nurse, when I would have a beautiful end of life experience, I would remember being so moved and coming out of the hospital room and saying, if people knew that, if they knew end of life could be like that, they would never, ever be afraid. So one of my greatest hopes is that we can, on this journey together at this time in our lives, change end of life from being that number 1 fear to being the perspective of awe, grace, and of almost celebration, again, that our loved one is going back to that beautiful, unconditional, loving home that we are all a part of. It is my hope in my platform that I am able to share with you stories, bedside stories and experiences that will allow you to step into that space of the perception of what is actually happening, because that is the truth. That is what's happening. But if we have removed our elderly, removed seeing end of life, talking about it, knowing anything about it, of course we don't have access to the sacredness that it is. But we are coming back. We are getting things together to share on many different platforms to be able for whoever would like to, again, look beyond the veil, step into this space, and allow death to teach you everything about how to live this journey fully in its best expression. So one of them, again, is this awareness of being visited by loved ones who come to help cross them over at the end of life, and angelic figures. So for most of my beautiful patients, it has been loved ones. But then there have been the angelic figures. And when you hear your patient describe being visited by angels, in fact, over the last couple of months, in one of our doula giver certification trainings, there was a doula who said she was working with a man. He was in his early 80s, and his family was around his bed. He was in his transition phase, and his family was around his bed. And she said at the end of his life, he sat up and he looked around and he said, I never knew how many angels I had around me. And then he had his end of life. So it's just incredible, you know, what that, again, awareness in the sacredness of this journey is like, and how healing and comforting and inspiring it is. They become incontinent. So at the end of life, we're going to lose the control over our bowel and bladder. So again, making that not a big deal, but you want to always uphold the highest level of dignity. Make sure that people are being checked for having to be cleaned. And also there are things that you can use like adult Depends and chucks under the bed so that it's an easy way to clean and care for somebody at that stage. But dignity is extremely important here. I would not ever do anything or change anyone in a room full of people. And sometimes people just, again, forget about that kind of awareness when they're dealing and it's frightened around end of life. So just know that that's a part of it. So making sure that that skin is kept clean. Confusions, hallucinations, that is always something that is written. So I added in, are they really? Are they really? Or are they seeing what they're seeing? I wholeheartedly, in every cell of my being, believe that they and know that they are seeing what they're seeing. And I feel how arrogant of us, because we're not seeing something, to say that that person's not seeing it. And again, studying, there's much more here, studying physics and energy and what's happening. I do a whole section on this in other trainings like life class and things of that nature, that yes, this has been validated by science, energy and frequency, and just justifying the physical body declining, the spiritual body growing, that they are able to access different frequency points that you are not able to see. So they are seeing exactly what they're seeing. One of the things that we don't want to have happen is family members to, first of all, get scared if your mom says that she sees her mother in the room, but also to never say to them, no, mom, you don't see that. Stop talking like that, because that's just unfair. So just know that that's a very common, beautiful thing. And how much does that really open up my mind to say there's so much more that's going on in this journey? And number 7, a surge of energy. What is a surge of energy? A surge of energy is this phenomenon that happens, not always, but happens where your loved one is sleeping most of the time in their transition phase, getting ready to go, and all of a sudden they wake up. They wake up and they are as clear as they have been, even maybe clearer than they've been in years. And one of the first things they do is usually ask for something to eat or drink. So I learned this as a young hospice nurse. I didn't know about the surge of energy, and I learned this. I had a patient who was very close to her transition end of life. She was in her transition phase. She was sleeping most of the time. You couldn't even get audible words from her. And one day I came in to visit, and I remember the adult grandson, who was about 25, sitting in the sunroom with his head down. And when I walked in that room, I remember turning directly to him because I thought she was in her sleep state, and he looked like he was really having the world of the on his shoulders. So I turned to him to see how he was, and all of a sudden I heard, hello. And I turned around, and this woman was looking at me, sitting up, looking at me, clear as day. And she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Oh," I said, "Hi." I said, "I'm the nurse that's here to see how you're doing." And I turned around to him, and he goes, "I know." He goes, "She's been like that since last night." I said, "What happened?" He said, "She woke up and she asked for Bailey's Irish cream and pizza." And I said, "What did you do?" And he goes, "We gave it to her." And I said, "Good." And then I remember contacting my senior hospice nurses and saying, "Hey, this is what's happening with my patient." And they said, "Oh, that is the surge of energy." What is the surge of energy? A surge of energy is what I call that window of opportunity. It is a gift. It is where somebody wakes up out of the blue and is as clear as day. And it usually lasts about 8 hours, maybe 12 if you're lucky. What we don't want to have happen is families to think that it's a miracle, that all that praying, that it's a spontaneous recovery. We also don't want to tell people ahead of time about the surge of energy, because they will be waiting for it and they may not get it. Many people don't get it. But I want you to know what it is, and it is a gift. It is a window of opportunity. It is for anything else that needs to be said, anyone else that needs to come. Use it to the best of your ability. Know that this is your gift, and it is incredibly magical when this does happen. So that, again, is the surge of energy. And giving loved ones permission to go, I have to share how very important this is. So in my experience, there have been 3 reasons. One of 3 reasons why people will not actually have that end of life take place. So picture that they're in that sleeping coma. One reason is they're waiting for something to be resolved. So they're waiting for some forgiveness, some argument in the home to be resolved, something to be resolved amongst everyone. And hearing is the last of the senses to go. So you can always still have conversations with your loved one who is at the end of life, even if when they are in their sleep coma, they can hear you. So they will wait for something to be resolved. And even that could be for you to give them forgiveness. That Mom, I forgive you. Maybe your mother was struggling her whole life, doing the best she could, but has a lot of guilt and shame for that. So you can still, again, give these things called forgiveness, but also making sure if there's discourse in the home, that that's being addressed. Number 2, they're waiting for someone to come. They're waiting for someone to come to the bedside. I remember as an oncology nurse, there was a gentleman, he was 33 years old and he was dying. It was Easter Sunday. And I remember that his daughter and ex had come on the train to the hospital. And not more than 5 minutes that they walked into his hospital room, I heard screaming. And I heard screaming, somebody say, get the baby out. And I remember we all ran down to that hospital room and went into that room, and it was almost like surreal. They were ushering that little girl out, and she was in this beautiful white dress, and it almost seemed to me like she was floating in air. It was all happening so quickly. She was about 5 years old. He waited for them to come to have his end of life, but it was very intense. And the third, so they're waiting for someone to come. And the third reason, and this happens the most often, is that they're waiting for someone to leave the bedside. They're waiting for you to walk away from the bedside. Why? Because they do not want that the last memory that you have of them. They know this is hard enough. This happens so often. So people who are at the bedside 24/7, day on end, the 5 minutes that person goes to get a cup of coffee, or that 5 minutes that person goes to take a shower, the loved one has their end of life. And these are people who've been in a sleep state coma with their eyes closed, not talking for days and or weeks. How did they know? How do they know the 5 minutes that you left the room? So when I have family members calling me, texting me, my mom, she's just not having her end of life, and everyone's here and we've said everything. What's happening? And I say, if we go through everything about, unresolved issues and forgiveness, and we go, is there anyone she's waiting for? And is she uncomfortable? Then we say, maybe you should consider stepping away from the bed. In fact, the family that I told you about initially today, in this beautiful webinar about the family, about building the trust, how that ended was that I went to that house that afternoon, and I remember the woman was in her transition. and letting them know that she was going to have her end of life that night. I felt very strongly about it, and how I talked to them about how she may not want to have her end of life with you right in front of her. So they told me the next day when I came to the house, they said that, and I have to tell you that that end of life transition was looking a little rough. It was looking a little labored, as we're going to talk about, and things you can do to help. The body is doing work to have its end of life. And that night, they told me that the adult son was sleeping on the floor of his mother's bedroom, because she was in the downstairs bedroom, and he was sleeping on the floor next to her bed. And the woman, they told me that the wife came down, and she said that she literally said to her husband, she said, "Do you remember what Suzanne said about leaving the bedside, about leaving the room for a bit? Come up to bed, please come up to bed." And this was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he did. And they said they came down at 5, and they said, when I came to the house the next morning, they said, happy. They answered the door. Their mother, yes, his mother had had her end of life, but they said, "You have to see her. We haven't touched her." Like, excited. And when I walked in that room, this woman was sitting, up in her bed a bit, in a white gown with like a smile on her face. She looked so peaceful and so beautiful. And that is something that they're going to hold in their heart for absolutely ever. So stepping away from the bed is one of the things. So one of the 3 things. So giving somebody permission to go. So letting your mom know that you're going to be okay. Letting her know that you're going to take care of, the family here. That if she's worried about, maybe she's worried about her husband, leaving her husband, her elderly husband. Say, "Mom, we're going to take care of Dad. You can go now." So many people have literally had their end of lives within minutes from having that permission. So remember, something to be resolved and giving permission, somebody to come, or stepping away from the bed. Actively dying. People will go into a sleep coma. What you need to make sure that is happening is that people are being turned in position periodically, and that you're looking for padding for bony prominences, for skin breakdown, to protect that skin from breaking down. Very, very important. Hospice will do a great job on teaching you how to do that. And also there is something called barrier cream that I love that can be used as an extra layer of skin protectant. Breathing changes. Shane Stokes, there is a term called the death rattle out there. I call it closer to source secretions, getting closer to that source. That is a gurgling sound that is a very late stage, but you want to be aware of that. And one of the best things that you can do to alleviate that sound, to do an intervention for comfort, is to literally turn your loved one on their side, having them at about a 45-degree angle, turning them on their side, folding a pillow the long way and putting it behind them so they are at an angle. Because this lodging of secretions is literally just happening by a pool of gravity. The body is starting to go flaccid. The swallowing reflex is starting to not be there, so secretions are building up, and literally, a lot of times people's mouths are hanging open a bit at this time, and you're hearing the air going in and out with hitting that pool of secretions that is at the breastbone due to the pooling and gravity. And so you just want to dislodge them by turning somebody on their side. If it builds up again, you can turn them on their other side. They usually have their end of life close to this time. Agonal labored breathing, periods of apnea, rapid breathing, shallow breathing. Know that your loved one is working really hard to get to go where they're going. So just don't be afraid of this. You can turn in position, and hospice may have suggestions for medications to use to even out the breathing as well. Again, what you can do, suggest the caregiver nurse administer morphine or Ativan. This is a hospice will direct on that, but know that that is something. And again, this can go under the cheek or in the tongue, or in the pocket of the cheek. And what I love is that beautiful turn in position technique to help, again, simply with gravity, and within seconds, you alleviate that sound. Body temperatures. You can possibly have a temperature increase prior, but then everyone will have a decrease. Why is this? And I love explaining rationale. The body is shutting down. It knows what to do. It's a natural process. And what's happening is the heart says, I don't have enough strength to pump the blood around the entire body anymore. So what it's doing is it's keeping the blood shunting around the vital organs. So at the core, so people's hands, feet, face, lips, that all gets cold and pale in a bluish color. Know what's happening, that the body is starting to shut down. And so what can we do? Again, use warm blankets for cold, a cool cloth if somebody is warm. There's also, if it's a high temperature and it's really bothersome to the family, the patient at this time is not feeling and experiencing these things, okay? But if the family is very concerned that there's a high fever, there is something in the comfort kit from hospice that is called a Tylenol suppository. I always opt to never do anything invasive unless it's completely necessary, but just know you have tools that you can work with. I always love to suggest to put a blanket in the dryer for 10-20 minutes and then wrap up Nana. Children can take part in this as well, and it's so very comforting. Skin color changes, that will be pallor, means pale, bluish, lips modeling of extremities. And again, this can be alarming to people. Let them know what's happening. This is let them always remind them that this is a natural process, that the body is shutting down. It knows what to do. And this is because the blood is now just being shunted around the core, the vital organs. We're getting closer to the time of death, but use things that we can do as far as warm blankets. Put your hand in your mom's hair. Hand, keep patient warm, warm extremities. Hand, I always put a chair next to the person's bed and encourage family to sit, maybe hold the hands gently, rubbing and just loving their loved one. And the gurgling of secretions, I talk about that being something that we call closer to source secretions. Put head of the bed about 45-degree angle, put a pillow folded the long way, and put it behind the patient's back so they are tilted to their side. This dislodges the secretions, and the gurgling noise should stop immediately. And setting a sacred space. So death used to be revered as a sacred passage and a sacred journey, and it is, and we're bringing that back. So here are some suggestions to create that sacred atmosphere. Soft background music. What does the person love? What kind of music did they love? And having it low in the back, vibrationally, it reduces fear. It creates an atmosphere and can be very calming. Dim candles, lighting candles. And of course, safety is something we don't negotiate on. So not flammable candles, but the ones that are battery operated. There's such incredible things that we can use now that you can get these wonderful, and they create a beautiful atmosphere without having any safety risk. Aromatherapy, lavender is something that reduces anxiety, or again, whatever the person desires. I mean, there's all different types of aromatherapy, frankincense and rose and different ones. And again, they create an energetic space of high vibration. It is the most comforting feeling, gentle touch. It is the most comforting feeling for the dying patient to know that someone is taking care of them and holding the trusted space. I always will talk to somebody and let them know I'm in the room, let them know before I'm going to do something, move them, touch them, and just having my hand on theirs or just on their shoulder or wherever, letting them know and sending that love energy to them. Talk softly. Hearing is the last of the senses to go. The person can hear you. Talk to them. Encourage family to talk to them. Many times, family may not have had the opportunity or the courage or wanted to have a conversation, a heart-to-heart, when the person was awake. You can still do this. And you want to encourage people to have that alone time and talk to their loved one. They can still give that forgiveness. They can still ask for forgiveness. They can still just have that heart-to-heart. Very important. And pets. Allow pets to be present and snuggle or lay next to their loved one. They bring incredible comfort to the patient, and the pet is also going through this loss. Thank you so very much, everyone, for being here, and congratulations again. You took time out of your busy schedule to come and take a training about end of life, and I hope that today you found great skills and information that will empower you to know how to care for someone that you love at the end of life. And I hope that it brought you comfort and allowed you to learn some incredible things about this journey called life that we are all in together. And that is exactly what we hope with World Training Day, to bring that awareness that no matter who you are, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what socioeconomic status, whatever religion, culture, that each and every one of us will be touched by this thing called end of life, and that a positive end of life is a human right and not a privilege. Thank you so very much for being here. For more information, you can go to worldtrainingday.org, or you can go to doulagivers.com. I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart, being part of Doula Givers World Training Day. Okay, we have a level 1 handout for you. For those of you who would like to have a handout of the entire level 1, that is going to be located, again, depending on what computer system you use, you will have a little bar that says handout. Sometimes it's a little red triangle, sometimes it is a little gray triangle. And if you click on that, you'll see End of Life Doula Training Level 1 PDF. You can download that to your computer and you can have for your records. I am going to answer any of your questions. If you have a question, please write it in the question box, and I will be answering. Yes, thank you so very much, you guys. Okay, so if you have a question, please put it in the question box now, and then I will tell you how you can follow up with questions where you can get in touch with us. So, okay. Yes, I see, Pam. Okay, so some of the emails popped in there, but that's okay. We got those out of there. Will I be able to get the replay of the webinar? Absolutely. So we have the webinar replay will probably be sent to you in about, let's say, 6 hours from now. You should receive that in your inbox. So we will give you that replay. And also, just so you know that, again, you can have that level 1 handout. And I do encourage you to download that, because I think sometimes it's really helpful, again, to see it in one place and to have everything at your fingertips for when you would like to review it or when you need it. This is so beautiful. The message that each of us can use in our loved ones' death. Suzanne, you are amazing. Thank you so much, Martha. That is really beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate you for saying that. So for those of you who, again, come up with maybe, later today, or you're thinking about this training, or you do the replay and you have any questions that you need answered, please reach out to us. And you can do that, again, by going to doulagivers.com, but the website email is support@doulagivers.com, and we are here and happy to answer any of your questions. It is so important, again, to create platforms that you have resources that you can reach out to for this end of life that, again, right now we are really removed from. So we want to create, again, holistic platforms and, again, resources that you can reach out for and you can share with people. I'm on an iPad, so there is no link to the level 1 handout. I would love to have it. This is fantastic. Thank you. So Lori, what you can do is you can just email us in at support@doulagivers.com, and what we'll do is just request that level 1 handout and we'll send it to you from there. And anyone else, you can please, again, if you can't get the handout for some reason on your computer, if you can't download it, just email us today or whenever you can at support@doulagivers.com requesting that level 1 PDF, and we'll send it to you. Thank you from Sweden. Thank you, Zoran. Thank you so much for being here. And again, it just reinforces and reiterates that we are a global family, and that this thing called humanity is one of the most important awarenesses that we can have at this moment. And the fact that we are holistic beings in this journey together is everything for again, where we are at this time and always. So Zoran, thank you so much. Sending you a big hug, and I want to thank everyone for being part of this. Okay, so Pauline writes, would you say that the fear of death is in part the fear of anticipated pain? Thanks so much. Yes, Pauline, so that's really great. So for the training purposes, I really want to highlight again and pinpoint why this is so important, this support. But you are absolutely correct that when you ask people what their fear is, so the number one fear is that people don't want to suffer. They don't want to suffer. And of course, obviously, that is so very important. And why you're seeing that today, that concern and that fear that's so palpable about suffering, is that a lot of people that had end of lives that they maybe as children, or they knew somebody in their life years ago, or even, I mean, I have to say, even occasionally now, if their pain is not well managed, but definitely in the past, like the past generations, you know, pain associated with end of life was a real thing and a real concern. But I have to share with you that today in our world, because of the advances that we've made in the medical system, because of the medications we have, because of the great work that hospice does as far as, you know, their comfort kits and what they have available, no one should ever have to suffer from pain. Now, with that being said, the pain management is only as good as the education of the caregiver. So that's where that gap is. So hospice is so beautiful, comes in, has the comfort care, but patients, families, I have found, are very concerned again and fearful of the medications. So a lot of times they don't give them. They don't want to do it wrong. They don't know what they're doing. So obviously then it's not effective. So no one ever has to suffer today because of the amazing availability that we have to medications at the end of life. However, they're only as good as the empowerment of the caregiver understanding how to use them. And that's where we come in to really share in that conversation. So thank you, Pauline, because that is very true. But no one ever should have to suffer. And that's why we want educational platforms to help support families in knowing how to be the best caregiver they could possibly be. Okay. So Fatima says that she cannot save the PDF, only open it. Yep. So Fatima, what I'm going to ask you to do, please, my dear, or just could you email that request into support@doulagivers.com. Our staff is standing by so they can send out whatever you need and answer your questions right now. So that is the best way, because this thread, I don't want it to get lost. So thank you for putting your email here. I just want to make sure that you get that PDF. And the best way to do it, because we have staff standing by right now to answer your questions and to give you the downloads, is to email that request in to support@doulagivers.com. Thank you so much for that. Christine says, thank you so much for this very informative alive training and information. Yeah, so Christine, I love that you put alive in the quotations, because I often will share that I started living the fullest in my whole life's journey when I started working for hospice. Why? Because it taught me everything about the truth, about what was important, about appreciating every moment. And one of the examples that I'll give you right now is that, you know, I remember, you know, when I'd end my work day and I would just, you know, be walking up to my house and the sun was shining, and I thought, wow, what a privilege and honor to be able to do this, to be able to, you know, go for a walk with the dog. And so instead of, you know, how many of us, and there's no judgment here, but how many of us, you know, sometimes say, you know, I have to go to the gym today, I have to work out today, or I have to go to the grocery store. I get to work out today. I get to go to the grocery store. It changes the perspective, which changes everything, and also just the fulfillment and connection of that human bond that is so incredible and fulfilling, and the thing that I feel like we're all looking for in this world. So thank you, Christine, for reinforcing that. Thank you so much. Rhiannon says this was a wonderful session. You are so welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. That was very insightful. Sabine from Ireland. So love, 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 love. This is such a small world, and we need to remember that how similar we are and how connected we are. And when we are here for each other, that's where the miracles happen. So thank you, Sabine, for being here. Fatima, thank you so much. You are so welcome. Thank you from the UK. Very informative and sensitive too. Linda, thank you so much. And thank you all. I'm not sure what time it is where you are in your beautiful parts of the world. And I want to thank you so much for, being here again, showing up and being part of this. So thank you, Linda, for that. I was called to end of life as a chaplain intern. I encouraged before I left to talk to the loved one, a young girl said, what if they are deaf? Well, it's very interesting, Maggie, and I love that the work that you do. In this space, there is so much non-verbal communication. And I think if you use the example, if you can understand again, I don't want to go too far off with energy and physics and frequency, but it's important because it's the truth of what we're all really made of. If you use the example of animals and how they respond to, the energy in the space and how your tone of voice is if somebody's deaf, but if there is a non-verbal communication, especially when that person is in that sleeping coma, that we teach families again that there are so many ways, especially one is your intention and the energy of what you're sending out and the thoughts that are inside of you, and all of that transfers to somebody in a communication form. So even if somebody, again, is nonverbal, there are so many ways that we communicate without words. And sometimes, again, what I teach people is, words are wonderful, but the true communication and the truth of what's going on is what you are getting. What are you feeling? Because sometimes somebody's words don't match how they really feel. Like, for instance, you come into somebody who has an end of life and you say, how are you doing today? And they say fine, and things aren't fine at all. Things aren't fine. So that's your knowing, and that is the most important diagnostic tool that we have. So thank you for Maggie for sharing that. Question from Polly: how do you distinguish between lots of sleeping due to impending end of life versus sleeping due to increased pain med? Because, okay, Polly, great question. So when you give any medication, you will be able to evaluate that medication within about 30 minutes from the ingestion, the time that somebody takes it, to the effect that that medication has, 30 to 45 minutes about. What I would say also to be very mindful of, because patients often will not want pain medicine because they don't want to be knocked out, they don't want to miss it. And pain medication, in my opinion, is one of the greatest learning curves and important spaces in teaching families. Because again, when I talk about, most people are very fearful of medication, so they maybe a lot of times don't give it, or maybe don't give it correctly and they're fearful of not giving it correctly. When you have a narcotic pain medicine, when it's initially introduced to somebody, it will make them more tired on that initial period of it being introduced into their system, and then they will balance out a bit. So again, people are worried about being overly medicated, and I totally understand that. They don't want to miss it. But if you have a very educated practitioner and you do it well, you only give a small amount of medicine to see where the therapeutic dose can be reached. So what I always tell people is that you can't take medicine out of somebody, you can put more in. So you, hopefully, if you have a great medical practitioner that is managing the case, they introduce a small amount and incrementally increase that until you reach a therapeutic dose, which is keeping pain levels around a 3 or a 4 of a scale from 1 to 10. So it might take a little time to get there, but it's not giving a bunch of pain medicine, knocking somebody out, which again, nobody would want. I wouldn't want that. And it really, again, is a education tool about managing it. So in the beginning, when someone first takes a pain medicine, they might get more sleepy at that initial stage, but then it evens out. And again, you want to go for a small increment up till you reach a pain threshold of a 3 to 4 on a pain scale of 1 to 10, because that allows somebody to have quality of life. If you had, and this is a acute issue, if you had high pain levels of a 7 or 8, pounding pain constantly, would you even be able to have a conversation with people you loved? Absolutely not. So a 3 or 4, you know it's there, but you can still go on and have quality to your day. So thank you, Polly. That's a great question. Sorry, what PDF is there? So there is a PDF that is located where it says handouts in your section. It is the entire level 1 in a PDF form. So you have everything in a document that you can keep. And then it's at your fingertips. And if you cannot find that for some reason on your computer or where you're located, how you're using the technology to get to the webinar today, you can email us at support@doulagivers.com, and we have our staff standing by to send you the PDF via email. So that might be easier. Okay, I recently learned that hospice care and palliative care are not embraced in every part of the world. Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, if we want to make a blanket statement, we could say that, although I really do believe that with our growing aging population, which is worldwide, and that we have never seen an aging population like the one we have now ever in history, and it's demographically only going to increase for decades to come, palliative care, which is managing, again, chronic conditions, close symptom management, is going to be paramount, is completely necessary for quality of life and for, again, helping people to manage chronic pain and different things of that nature because of the length that we're living. We're going to be living with these disease processes for the most part. So it might not be in every part of the world, but I think it's growing rapidly. And I think that we have a great opportunity to, again, share information that we know with other parts of the world that can really benefit them. And that's why we do this for free. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Claire, so much for this. Question, Jackie says, how do you support the dying who loved life so much and face the fear that death is so final and out of their control and final, they must let it all go? So Jackie, thank you. You know, I think in the beginning of the training today, we shared that it's not our job to fix it, and that can be a really hard, frustrating place. With that being said, it is our job to show up for one another. And when you use, and when we find that we use the techniques in shock phase, stabilization phase, transition phase, that especially in that shock phase, when you show up, meet people where they are with no judgment, don't take over, it allows them, again, to and manage acute issues. It allows them to start internally, and there's something organic that happens in the pathway of the end of life space. When I talk about the physical body declining and the spiritual body growing larger, there is an organic thing that happens at end of life many times, that people will start to get a different, what I call their spiritual wisdom or their spiritual eyes. And they oftentimes will get a perspective of looking at their life's journey in a different way. And remember that there is different things that I've seen happen with my patients that have been in that place that you talk about, really fearful, that there might be a dream or there might be a visitation of somebody that helps them to, again, break open in a different way. Now, does that always happen? No. Is it really hard to see people suffer? Yes. Even if it's, again, that emotional suffering. But I think that if you can help people do life reviews, or again, show up and be supportive and ask, what can I do for you? And just really be that loving, strong, supportive presence, there is an opportunity for that person to be able to go into a stabilization phase and make sense of this. Now, is it, it's on their time frame? Is it always 100% guaranteed? No, but do we have a very high success rate with all of it? Yes. So show up, ask what you can do for them, never take over, and allow them to go through their process. If you need help on this, if you particularly have somebody right now that you're working with and you need more support on that, please let us know. You can contact us and we'll give you a little bit more guidance on that, because some of them obviously can be heavier than others. Thank you, Jackie, for that question. Thank you for offering this great presentation. You are so welcome, Maggie. Love from Uruguay. Thank you so much, Veronica. Love you so much, and thank you for all the work you do with the Wise Humanity Summit. Thank you, my dear. Just shout out, thanks for leading this movement to normalize, optimize dying process. Thank you, Sherry Klein, and thank you for all that you do as well. And yes, I love that, normalize. You know, bringing death back into the natural fold of life, absolutely. They are not exclusive of one another. They are the same, and also how much beauty we can learn about this life's journey from it. Thank you for that. Thank you. From a caregiver in the business of sharing life's journey for 30 years and a mom and daughter who has many, of a mom whose daughter has many ongoing medical issues, many of which her friends have passed at very young ages, it's a comfort to know that I can now have the tools and some knowledge to help those around me, to bring understanding and maybe comfort to a process that can be very misunderstood and scary, is a true asset. Many blessings, Teresa. You have just really, really moved me. And also I want to thank you because it reinforces why we work so hard and want to share this on so many levels, because that's all the confirmation that I need, that it can help you and this situation. And thank you so much for that. And I'm sending so much love to you. Okay. Greetings, this is Clarissa Stinson from the United States. I'm an independent disability service provider who cares for all types of patients. I really appreciate you sharing the information about the medication, because here in the hospice care palliative, I feel patients are over-medicated. Thank you for speaking my mind. You are so welcome, Clarissa. First of all, thank you for the beautiful work that you do. And here's the truth of everything is that if we do not have conversations and platforms to explore things like end of life and all of the wonderful pathways around it, and especially medications, we're never going to be able to make change or go anywhere. So this is an extremely important space. The medications are extremely important to talk about. I'll probably be doing a continuing webinar just on medications so that we can really go into depth about it, because it can really be a great asset when used correctly. And of course, we want to support everyone with that. Caroline says, thank you, Suzanne. We'll check the website for training. Oh, perfect. Yes. So those of you, right, who are interested in trainings, you can obviously go to doulagivers.com. We have many different, and again, we have lots of free educational outreach. That's our platform. That's what we were built on. You know, this movement 18 years ago started as this level 1 training in a library in Millerton, New York, and it birthed into a global movement. Why? Because we all have this experience, and also we are not really embracing or bringing the beautiful supportive awareness of end of life. And again, most people haven't seen it. So thank you for that. And yes, more information on continued trainings, you can go to doulagivers.com for that, or ask any questions that you'd like. Next question is, thank you from Nova Scotia. Thank you so much for being here. Love that. Greetings from Guatemala. Wendy, thank you so much. My gosh, you guys, thank you so very much. I absolutely love you, and I cannot wait to get together in person when we are able. After listening to you, I realized that I intuitively did the right things when my partner died in February. Maybe this knowing is already in us somewhere. Again, thank you so much. You are such an inspiration, Sabine. First of all, I'm hugging you so much from my space, Sabine, and I want to say yes. You are absolutely correct that somewhere inside of us that we all have what is called the higher consciousness. It is a vibrational access point, and we have it. And I think that is so wonderful. And I want to thank you for sharing with people that you can get healing, closure, and a peaceful space by taking, and again, learning about this training, but putting it together with something, a past experience that you've had. So many people are dealing with the grief, and did I do this right, and the unknowing, because we don't talk about this. There is still, There's still healing that you can have taking this training. It empowers you for the future, of course. It teaches you about how to live fully now, and you can heal experiences from the past. So we really want to share that. And we have talked with our team because of the outreach from people from this World Training Day. We are going to make a monthly offering, and we will let you know. So we will have a free monthly training like this every single month, so you can share this with people because it's that important, and people have been responding in such a beautiful way. Suzanne, you are so knowledgeable, generous, and a great leader in reminding us that a good death is possible for us. Riva, thank you so very much. And that was the last question. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. Reminding you that we have an 8 p.m. Eastern time. If you want to share it with anyone, if you want to let them know that tonight we have another one. But again, we will be doing monthly World Training Day level 1 so that everyone can take part. And one more question came in. Thank you for hosting this World Training Day, Suzanne. You have a loving presence and a gift for educating folks at all levels. Thank you so much, Wendy. That is beautiful. So I, again, want to thank you so much for being here on Doula Givers World Training Day. When we work together, that is where the miracles happen. So thank you for being part of that, and thank you everyone who was here today. My name is Suzanne O'Brien. Please, if you have any questions, you can email us at support@doulagivers.com. I love you so much, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.